Ever heard of a guy living a totally normal life, but then becomes a global phenomenon? That's Chico Xavier in a nutshell. We're diving into the life of this Brazilian legend, using his Portuguese Wikipedia entry as our guide. He was a simple man who became internationally famous and is still deeply loved in Brazil.
It's fascinating how Xavier embodies this paradox. His life story is almost like a fable, packed with incredible claims and fiery controversies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where does this extraordinary story begin?
Chico Xavier, born Francisco Candido Xavier in 1910, came from the humblest of beginnings. Picture a rural Brazilian town, a large family of 9 children just scraping by. His father, a lottery ticket seller, and his mother, a laundress, had no formal education. It was a world away from the fame he would one day achieve.
Yet, even in these humble beginnings, there were hints of something different.
Absolutely. Biographers say Xavier's first encounter with the spirit world supposedly happened when he was just 4 years old.
4 years old? Wow, I can barely remember what I had for breakfast. What happened?
Details about this early experience are limited, but it's crucial because it marks the beginning of what would define his life. Chico Xavier's alleged direct communication with the spirit world.
That's a pretty wild claim for someone so young. But life wasn't about to get any easier for him, was it?
Tragically, no. When Xavier was only 5, his mother died, leaving his father unable to care for all 9 children.
That's heartbreaking. What happened to them?
They were separated and sent to live with relatives. Chico ended up with his godmother, Rita de Cassia.
And this is where things take a darker turn, right? Xavier's godmother wasn't exactly the nurturing type.
To put it mildly, accounts describe alleged abuse and psychological torment. Rita de Cassia is portrayed as cruel, prone to violent outbursts.
What kind of abuse are we talking about?
Xavier later claimed his godmother, convinced he was possessed, would beat him regularly. Some accounts even describe her stabbing him with forks and refusing to remove them. It's important to remember these are accounts from biographers, and we're dealing with a time when documentation wasn't what it is today.
That's a chilling image. It's hard to imagine a child enduring such pain.
It really is, and it makes you wonder about the psychological impact of such experiences. It's tempting to speculate how these early traumas might have influenced his later beliefs and his perceived connection to the spirit world.
So, amidst this horrific situation, was there any light in his young life?
A glimmer of hope arrived when Xavier was 7. His father remarried Sedalia Batista, a woman who brought much-needed warmth and love into his life.
Thank goodness for that. It sounds like Sedalia was a positive influence after such a traumatic period.
Absolutely. Sedalia is described as kind and generous, embracing all her stepchildren. She had a particularly close relationship with Chico, supporting him through those early, often confusing experiences with what he believed to be the spirit world.
It's like a classic story, Darkness Before the Dawn, with his stepmother representing a more positive chapter.
That's a great way to put it. But more challenges were to come. Remember, we're talking about a boy who claimed to communicate with spirits since he was 4. At around 17, something happened that would solidify his path and plunge him even deeper into Spiritism.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What happened?
One of Xavier's sisters became extremely ill. Doctors struggled to diagnose her, but Xavier believed it was spirit obsession.
Spirit obsession. That sounds intense. For those of us who might not be familiar, can you explain what that means in the context of Spiritism?
Of course, it's a core concept in Spiritism, the idea that a spirit, not necessarily evil, can influence a living person's thoughts and actions. Xavier believed he could help his sister by communicating with these spirits.
And did it work? Did his sister recover?
Whether through Xavier's intervention or other means, his sister did regain her health. But this experience was a turning point for him. It solidified his belief in Spiritism. And crucially, this is when he started attributing his own writing to the spirits.
Wait, attributing his own writing? What do you mean?
Xavier claimed that the spirits of dead poets were communicating through him, using him as a vessel to continue their work in the living world. He began producing poems and writings that he insisted weren't his own, but those of spirits speaking through him.
So that's how Chico Xavier, the writer, was born. This is just the beginning of his story.
You could say that this is merely the first act in a life filled with astounding claims, fierce criticism, and a legacy that still inspires both passionate belief and skeptical inquiry. But to understand just how prolific he became, well, that's a story for after a quick break.
So Xavier's life takes this incredible turn. He goes from a childhood of wonder and hardship to becoming, as he believed, a conduit for the words of spirits. But we are about to dive into just how prolific a writer he became.
Prepare to be amazed. Over his lifetime, Chico Xavier allegedly psychographed, meaning wrote under the influence of spirits, over 450 books. And we're not talking short stories, novels, philosophical treatises, even technical works. Yeah. Plus, on top of that, an estimated 10,000 letters.
10,000 letters. Wow. That's more correspondence than most people send in a lifetime. Who are these letters for?
Mostly grieving families, claiming to be messages from their deceased loved ones. And here's where things get really interesting. Xavier never charged a penny for these letters. He believed his gift, was meant to be shared freely to help others.
So we have this man living modestly, working a government job, producing a library's worth of material, all allegedly dictated by spirits and given away for free.
This sounds like something out of a movie.
It gets even more cinematic, trust me. Let's talk about the Humberto de Campos case. This is where spiritualism, authorship, and the law intersect in a fascinating way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Who was Humberto de Campos, and how did he end up at the center of a case with Chico Xavier?
Humberto de Campos was a famous Brazilian author, well-respected during his lifetime. After Campos died, Xavier started publishing works that he attributed to Campos' spirit, essentially saying Campos was still writing, but now through him.
I bet that turned some heads in the literary world. It was a huge deal. But it wasn't just the literary world that took notice. Campos's widow was furious. She sued Xavier, claiming copyright infringement. Her argument was that if these were truly Campos's words, then she, as his heir, owned the rights to them.
So it wasn't just about money. This case raised some really big questions. If a spirit dictates a book, who owns it? The medium? The spirit's living relatives? It really makes you think about the nature of creativity and authorship.
That's exactly why this case captivated Brazil. It ignited a national debate about authorship, intellectual property, and how the legal system should handle claims of spirit communication. It really challenged people's understanding of these concepts.
So what was the verdict? Did the court rule on whether a spirit could hold a copyright?
Well, not quite. The judge ruled that copyright law at the time only applied to works produced during a person's physical lifetime. They basically sidestepped the entire spirit authorship question.
That's quite a loophole, but this wasn't the only time Xavier found himself in the middle of a controversy, was it?
Unfortunately, no. Throughout his life, there were many accusations of fraud. Some people claimed he was faking the psychography or using tricks. His Portuguese Wikipedia entry even mentions a few other notable cases like the David Nasser and Amari Pena situations.
Okay, I have to ask. Who are David Nasser and Amari Pena?
David Nasser was a well-known journalist at the time. He actually went undercover to see if Xavier was the real deal, pretending to be someone else to test his abilities. Interestingly, Nasser later admitted that Xavier produced a psychographed message for him, even though he was using a false identity, which spooked him a bit.
That's both eerie and intriguing. It makes you wonder about the possibility of cold reading, where a medium might pick up on subtle cues to appear as though they have special knowledge. Okay, what about Amari Pena?
Amari was actually Xavier's nephew, also claiming to be a medium. However, their relationship soured when Pena publicly accused Xavier of being a fraud, claiming he was also faking his abilities. Although he later recanted these accusations. Sadly, Pena ended up in a psychiatric hospital where he passed away. It's a tragic story that highlights the complexity of these situations.
This is all so fascinating, but I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. Despite the controversies and accusations, Xavier remained deeply loved and respected in Brazil. Why? What was it about him that resonated so deeply with people?
That's the most remarkable part of Chico Xavier's story. It wasn't just about the writing. It was about something much bigger. To understand this, we need to step back and look at the cultural context of Brazil.
You were about to explain how the cultural context of Brazil helps people understand Chico Xavier.
Right. Spiritism, while not as widespread as Catholicism in Brazil, has deep roots there. It blends elements of Christianity with reincarnation and the idea of talking to the dead.
So Xavier tapped into something that already resonated with a lot of Brazilians.
Exactly. His works, regardless of who you believe was behind them, offered comfort, hope, and a connection to loved ones who had passed away. And Xavier didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk.
What do you mean?
He lived a remarkably modest life, donating all the proceeds from his books to charity. In fact, his Wikipedia entry mentions him helping found over 2,000 charitable institutions, hospitals, schools, orphanages. He didn't just preach love and compassion, he lived it.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder if he ever had any regrets about not cashing in on his fame, especially when facing fraud accusations. He could have easily said, hey, I'm just a writer, and been done with it.
That's a great point. And unfortunately, we can only speculate. Perhaps his belief in the spirit world was so strong that material wealth held little importance. Or maybe he felt a responsibility to use his platform, controversial as it was, to make a real difference in the lives of others.
His life story practically screams, make me into a movie. But the final chapter is both poignant and, for believers, strangely fitting. Tell us about his death and the almost unbelievable timing of it all.
Chico Xavier died in 2002 at the age of 92 from heart failure. Nothing extraordinary about the circumstances except for one detail. He passed away on the same day Brazil won the World Cup.
Wow, are you serious?
I wouldn't make this up. It's one of those things that makes you stop and think, coincidence.
What are the odds of that? Did he know it was coming?
Some who knew him claim Xavier often said he wanted to die on a day when Brazilians were overjoyed so his passing wouldn't dampen their happiness. True? Or just a heartwarming story that's grown over time, it adds another layer to the mystery that is Chico Xavier.
So after this deep dive into his life, work, and controversies, where do we even begin to separate fact from fiction with someone like Chico Xavier?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the lack of a definitive answer is part of what makes his story so captivating. Even today, people are drawn to the unknown, the unexplained, and Xavier's life is full of it.
What about all the scientific attempts to analyze his work? I've heard about handwriting analysis and even EEGs done during his trances. Did those offer any conclusive proof?
There were studies, yes. Some handwriting experts claimed the writing attributed to different spirits showed unique stylistic differences, suggesting it wasn't just Xavier changing his writing style. And EEG readings during his trances did show some unusual brainwave activity, but there was nothing definitive pointing to any outside influence.
So no smoking gun. Like a good mystery, we're left with more questions than answers.
And maybe that's the point. Whether Chico Xavier was a genuine medium, a master storyteller, or a bit of both, he tapped into a fundamental human need, the desire to believe in something beyond ourselves, to find connection and meaning even in the face of death. That's a powerful legacy to leave behind.
Well said. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm sure our listeners feel the same. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the life of Chico Xavier. Until next time.